So I kind of did a bad thing. I think it maybe did. So I basically did what I tell people not to do. I had been using my sourdough starter and feeding it every day or feeding at least once a week. And then I got kind of burned out on baking because I've been doing a ton of baking, preparing for some special projects that I've been working on, like my cookbook and a cooking course for you guys. And I kind of got to the point where I just needed a break from Mr. Sourdough. And so I stuck it in the fridge, and I haven't really fed it for about 3 months, which isn't super ideal, and it may be completely dead, but we're gonna have to see. So it's been in the refrigerator this whole time, and that's probably maybe a little bit of a saving grace. If it had been on the countertop that whole time, it'd definitely be too far gone to revive. As it stands now, we still might be to that point, but I'm gonna see if I can bring it back to life. So if you've ever had this happen with your sourdough, the first thing you'll probably notice is this super appetizing gray liquid, and that's normal. It's just kind of a byproduct of the yeast and all the stuff in there. Some people call it hooch, and I just usually pour it off. I've heard some people say they mix it back in, but I figure if it's kind of a waste product, I might as well dump it off and give the sourdough kind of a fresh start. And then it's just time to feed it again. I'm gonna pretend like it's a normal happy sourdough starter. I'm gonna feed it just like I would if it was alive, because I hope it's alive. And what I usually feed my starter is a ratio of 1 to 1 to 1, which means by weight, I usually go 1 part in weight of sourdough starter itself, 1 part flour and 1 part water in weight. So let me show you how that looks. Normally I would dump out the starter until I have only about a half cup left, and that just makes my ratios for feeding easier. But when you're kind of bringing a starter back to life, I don't usually stay super exact. I think I have about a cup in there now. I'm just gonna leave that and then add my flour and water. So to this, I'm going to add about a half cup of water, and I'm not measuring perfectly, just kind of at this point close counts. And I'm gonna see if I can kind of get the cement off the bottom. It's pretty gooey and sticky and dormant right now. Hopefully not completely dead. And then I'm just gonna add a scant cup of all-purpose flour once I get this mixed together. And this is just gonna be food for the starter. Let me grab a funnel. So I'd say there's about a 50-50 chance this will work. And what I'm just gonna do is once I mix it all together, I just need to start watching it for bubbles. And I'm gonna keep it in a warm place. I'm not gonna put it back in the refrigerator right now. I'm just gonna keep it out on the counter or in a warm spot in the kitchen, and hopefully I'll start to see some bubble action. When I smell it, it still smells sour and tangy, so I know it's not moldy. It doesn't smell offensive or anything like that, and there wasn't any mold in the jar. So I think we have a pretty good shot. We'll just have to see what happens. And now we wait. Okay, day 2. Look at this, you guys. Bubbles! So I have to say that number 1, I am completely happy and slightly surprised that it is not dead, because I did neglect it for several months with no food, no care whatsoever in a cold refrigerator. But I'm also a little shocked that when I woke up this morning, I don't know if you can see that, there's a lot of bubble action. Like, it pretty much climbed up the edge of the jar, which I did not expect for its first feeding after coming out of cold storage. So I'm really happy. That means this is a happy little starter, and it smells amazing, and look how happy and bubbly it is. So I don't know exactly how long it took for it to get to this bubbly stage, because I basically fed it and then didn't look at it last night and then went to bed. So it might have taken 8 to 10 hours to get to this point of bubbleness. So I suppose if I was living on the edge, I could use it right now to make some bread or some sort of sourdough recipe that needs a rise, but I'm not feeling very adventurous today, so I think I'm gonna discard part of it, feed it again just like I did last night, and give it at least one more day before I really expect anything out of it as far as functioning as a yeast in a recipe that really needs a good rise. Okay, so just like last night, I'm gonna go 1:1:1 ratio for feeding in weight. So that's about a half a cup of starter, about a half a cup of water, and about a scant cup of flour, because that equals about 4 ounces each in weight. Okay, so this is the part that's a little bit controversial, and probably some of you will yell at me for this. I'm gonna dump out part of the starter, and it's called discard. I promise I am not a cruel and horrible human being, but obviously if I keep feeding this 1:1:1 ratio, it will eventually take over my kitchen. So I have to discard a little bit of it or get a ginormous jar. And you can do good things with the starter. Oh my gosh, you guys, this is so bubbly. Like, even as I'm stirring it, there's so much air in there. It's awesome. I lost my train of thought. But anyway, you don't have to necessarily throw the discard down the drain or put it in the trash. You could give it to your chickens, although mine aren't usually super excited over it. Or you could use it to make other recipes like pancakes or waffles or crepes. There's a ton of recipes for this in my upcoming Prairie Homestead cookbook that puts inactive, discarded sourdough to really good use. So even if it's not bubbly and quite 100% active yet, it still makes delicious foods. But because today I'm not cooking anything, I'm actually headed outside in a minute, and this has been sitting in the fridge for a long time, you know, prior to me feeding it yesterday, I think I'm just gonna discard about half of this. So I have about a half a cup left, and then I'm gonna feed it and let it sit for at least another day before I do anything super exciting with it. Okay, I dumped a little bit out, and now we're gonna add our other ingredients. There's a lot of different trains of thought on what to feed a sourdough starter. There's people who do all sorts of different ratios. There's people who measure it out and are very exact. That is not me. I found this 1:1:1 works pretty darn good for my homestead brain, with a lot of other things on my brain, which this is not my primary goal in life, is to have a perfect sourdough starter. So this works good. If you want a wetter starter or a gooier starter or a thicker starter, you can adjust accordingly, but I've never had any issues with this method. And this is just unbleached organic all-purpose flour. Okay, now the lid's on loosely. I'm gonna set it back on my counter in a warm place for another 12 hours or so before I feed it again. But I'm gonna be paying attention to see how long it takes for the bubbles to really start forming, and that'll tell me how active it is and maybe how many more feedings it needs to go before it's ready to make a loaf of bread. So it's been a few days since my last little video clip, and we had a few developments, namely a bigger jar and more bubbles. So I've been feeding it about once every 24 hours. Once it kind of started going, I switched from every 12 hours to 24 hours, and I did forget one day and it still was fine. And these bubbles are from a feeding that I did about 8 o'clock this morning. They actually bubbled up within 3 to 4 hours of that feeding, which tells me this is just about as perfectly active as you can ask for, and it's ready to make our favorite homestead sourdough loaf of bread. So if sourdough is something that you're wanting to get into, or you have more questions about it, but for the last year, I have been working furiously on a project that I am calling the Heritage Cooking Crash Course, because some of the most popular content on my blog and on this channel is always about the from scratch, old-fashioned style recipes that I love so much. So I decided to basically bring you into my kitchen and show you step by step how to make all of the recipes and techniques and old-fashioned vintage skills that I know many of you are dying to learn and you just aren't sure where to start. So right now you can register for this free preview period. The free preview period lasts from March 11th to March 16th, 2019. And you can register now, get on the list, and then once March 11th rolls around, we'll be sending you a bunch of videos every single day that you get to watch. So I'm going to drop the link for your free registration in the show notes below. And if you've been really wanting to master sourdough and figure out a routine with sourdough that works for you, you will not want to miss the free preview period. So that's it, guys. I'm gonna go make some bread for the family. They are ready for some sourdough after having a couple months without it. Thanks for watching. I'd love to hear your sourdough experiences. If you currently have a starter, if you want to have a starter, if you've ever had trouble with a starter, drop that in the comments below, and I'll be back next week with another homestead tutorial video.